You know what's more dangerous than committing a murder? It's confessing that murder to the wrong person. Jennifer Gledhill planned everything. She shot her husband in his sleep. She disposed of the body with methodical, brutal efficiency. And she reported him missing to the police. It was a perfect plan, designed to grant her total freedom from a collapsing marriage. But in the hours following the cover-up, she made a fatal, arrogant mistake. She sent this message to her secret lover. "I shot him." Jennifer thought she was cementing a future with her new partner. She was actually handing the police the single most damning piece of evidence they could ever ask for. We are not just going to explore how she killed her husband, Matthew Johnson, but who double-crossed her, transforming a secret lover into the prime witness against her own horrific crime. That man provided everything, and the entire truth was resting right there in her phone. The stage for this domestic horror was set in Cottonwood Heights, Utah, a quiet suburban backdrop that housed anything but peace. Matthew Johnson, 51, was a man of service, a respected soldier in the Utah National Guard, a father to 3 children. He was an absent presence, often away on duty, his life consumed by order and discipline. Jennifer, 42, was the woman left behind to manage the facade. For her, Matthew's structured life became a prison, fueling her resentment and her desire to break free. By mid-2024, the marriage was fractured beyond repair. Jennifer filed for divorce in July, turning their home into a legal cage fight, primarily over custody and finances. But the divorce papers only hid the real friction: Jennifer's secret lover. On the evening of September 20th, 2024, Matthew returned home. We don't know the exact trigger, a text message, a slip of the tongue, but Matthew discovered the affair. All hell broke loose. According to court documents, Matthew raged, yelling at Jennifer, confirming his knowledge of her infidelity. This wasn't just a spouse reacting to betrayal. This was a man asserting his last piece of control. This confrontation was the omen, the definitive moment where Jennifer decided that Matthew was not just an unwanted husband, but a barrier to her desired future. In her eyes, Matthew had to be silenced to ensure the continuity of her new life. The chilling part of this plot is not the murder itself, but the chilling premeditation it suggests. The murder took place on or around September 21st, but 2 days prior, on September 18th, Jennifer sent a cryptic, urgent text to her father. "Thomas, I need $13,000 by Friday. $13,000. This wasn't a casual request. Why did Jennifer need that specific amount of cash just 48 hours before Matthew was killed? Was it a prepayment for an accomplice? Was it the initial seed money to flee the state, or perhaps a down payment on a new life with her lover? This unanswered $13,000 question becomes the seed of our mystery. It suggests this wasn't an explosive crime of passion, but a planned financial transaction where Matthew's life was the ultimate cost. We must hold on to this detail. It will become crucial when we analyze her bizarre psychological state later in the series. Sometime in the pre-dawn hours of September 21st, as Matthew Johnson slept, likely exhausted from the explosive confrontation, Jennifer moved. With terrifying calm, she retrieved his own 9mm handgun. She executed him in his sleep. There was no struggle, just silence. The cover-up began immediately. Jennifer went to great lengths to erase the soldier. She smashed Matthew's cell phone to eliminate any digital footprint. She hid his truck in a nearby neighborhood, painting a picture of an abrupt, unannounced departure, something a soldier like Matthew would never do. But the most macabre part of the cleanup was the body itself. Jennifer loaded Matthew's body, a man over 50, into a plastic roof storage container. She confessed to dragging this heavy container down the stairs of their home, a struggle so intense it left severe bruising on her arms and legs. She then managed to load the makeshift coffin into the back of her minivan and drove north, burying Matthew in a shallow grave at an undisclosed location. This level of physical labor and cold-blooded dedication suggests a deep personal commitment to erasing Matthew entirely. She didn't want him gone. She wanted him non-existent. For nearly a week, Jennifer played the concerned wife. When the Utah National Guard called, worried about Matthew's silence, Jennifer eventually filed a missing person report on September 28th. She told authorities Matthew may have simply left due to the divorce stress. But just hours after lying to the police, she made the critical error. She contacted her lover, the unnamed man she planned to build her future with, and confessed everything. She detailed the killing, the brutal disposal, and the location of the burial. Everything. She sought validation, understanding, and complicity. Instead, she found a frightened, morally conflicted man. The lover, terrified of being drawn into a first-degree murder case, decided to become the state's key witness. He provided detectives with everything he had. Every incriminating text message, and perhaps most devastatingly audio recordings of Jennifer describing the murder and cover-up in her own voice. The perfect murder was destroyed by a moment of supreme, arrogant vulnerability. Armed with the lover's confession, detectives executed a search warrant on the Gledhill Johnson home. Matthew's body was still missing, but the house told the story. The murder scene was clearly visible. Under the carpet, beneath the spot where Matthew's side of the bed rested, investigators found a definitive bloodstain. The walls, the blinds, and the bed frame all showed signs of being aggressively scrubbed with bleach, Jennifer's futile attempt to erase the evidence. The blood was later confirmed to be from a single male source. Jennifer Gledhill was arrested in October 2024. She was charged with first-degree murder, 5 counts of obstruction of justice, and desecration of a human body. Her calculated plan had crashed down around her, thanks entirely to her own impulsive confession to the one person who could betray her. The shocking discovery of blood under the bed confirmed the murder, but it did not bring Matthew Johnson home. To this day, the body of the respected soldier remains missing, buried in a shallow grave only Jennifer Gledhill knows the location of. Jennifer has pleaded not guilty to all charges. Her lawyer must now try to dismantle the most complete body of evidence imaginable, her own recorded words given to her lover. The betrayal is immense, but the psychological angle is even darker. In questioning, Jennifer chillingly compared herself to the Queen of Hearts from Alice in Wonderland, saying she wouldn't mind being put to death if she deserved it, and musing about eliminating the scum of the earth. The stain beneath the carpet of the marital bed was a definitive act of violence, but the prosecution needed an undeniable crack in Jennifer Gledhill's perfectly crafted narrative of divorce and departure. They found that crack not in a detective's brilliance, but in the terrified conscience of a man caught in the web of a killer. That man was Jennifer's secret lover, who overnight became the state's key informant. He was the one Jennifer had trusted, the one she planned to build her future with, and the one she foolishly entrusted with the most catastrophic secret of her life. He contacted the police after the confession, paralyzed by the horror of the details she shared. This wasn't the life he signed up for. This was a descent into darkness with a woman who had executed her husband as he slept. His decision to cooperate was the ultimate betrayal of Jennifer, but the ultimate act of justice for Matthew. The informant presented detectives with an unprecedented gift: text messages and audio recordings of Jennifer confessing and detailing the crime. This was the moment the case transitioned from a missing person inquiry with a suspicious wife to an ironclad murder prosecution. The evidence was presented not through forensics but through the killer's own voice, an audio confession chilling in its banality. On the recordings, Jennifer described the moments after the shooting with a terrifying lack of remorse. She spoke about the arduous task of moving Matthew's body, a soldier over 200 pounds, with the same detached tone one might use describing chores. She detailed the physical strain, the bruises she sustained, and the use of the roof storage container to transport the body. This detail, initially sounding like a desperate movie plot, was confirmed by the deep bruises observed on her body by the informant himself. The police now knew where Matthew was not, but they still didn't know where he was. The informant mentioned that Jennifer had a green and tan Glock 19X handgun, Matthew's own gun, and that she had hidden it. This provided the next crucial leverage point in the investigation. Detectives shifted their focus from the crime scene, the house, to the complicity network. Where had Jennifer sought sanctuary after the murder?
She had gone to stay with her parents, Thomas and Rosalie.
This search led to one of the most visually damning discoveries of the entire case. Serving a warrant at her parents' home, investigators found a plastic tote bag near the bedroom Jennifer had been occupying. Inside this tote, they found a green and tan Glock 19X gun box, the exact model used in the shooting. The most chilling detail? The box was wrapped in a child's onesie. The murder weapon, confirmed by the informant and consistent with the execution, was hidden within a symbol of her children's innocence. This finding elevated the case, linking Jennifer directly to the weapon and confirming the calculated nature of her actions. Deep within the safety net of her family, this gun box discovery tied directly back to the $13,000 question we raised in Part 1. Did the $13,000 relate to the weapon, the cover-up, or something more sinister? With the gun now in evidence, the initial theories of a passionate, spur-of-the-moment crime completely collapsed. Despite Jennifer's cold confession about the shallow grave north of their home, Matthew Johnson's body has never been recovered. The missing soldier became the center of a massive, agonizing search. Dozens of officers, volunteers, and even members of the National Guard joined the hunt, scouring vast, rural areas of Utah. The fact that an Army man could be executed and then simply vanish struck a nerve deeply within the community. The search was not only physically grueling, but emotionally draining. Every day the body remained missing, Jennifer's defense gained subtle ground, however small. No body, no crime. It's a tired defense strategy, but one the Gledhill legal team was prepared to lean on. However, the police were quick to shut down this argument. As Deputy District Attorney Emily Paulo stated in a court hearing, Matthew Johnson is not missing. Matthew Johnson was murdered by the defendant. The evidence, the blood, the gun box, and the audio confession was overwhelming, even in the absence of the victim. Jennifer was held without bail. She was presented in court where she pleaded not guilty to all 9 felony charges. But as the trial date loomed, the focus shifted from Jennifer's actions to the betrayal of her own family. Why did the parents help clean up the evidence? Did they know about the $13,000? The discovery of the Glock box, Matthew Johnson's own weapon, wrapped in a child's onesie and hidden at her parents' residence, was far more than just locating the murder weapon. It was the definitive evidence that Jennifer's heinous act was not a lone mission born of desperation, but a calculated criminal conspiracy involving her closest kin. The protective shield Jennifer sought immediately after the execution was not just from the law, but from the unyielding loyalty, or perhaps the manipulation, of her own flesh and blood, Thomas and Rosalie Gledhill. This meant the betrayal of Matthew was not a singular crime. It was a dark, calculated family endeavor designed to erase a life and obstruct justice at every turn. The investigation, propelled by the informant's testimony, immediately zeroed in on Jennifer's parents, the individuals who had provided her sanctuary in the critical hours and days following the killing. It was soon revealed that Thomas and Rosalie were not merely offering a bed to a distraught daughter. They were actively involved in corrupting a crime scene. They were the ones who meticulously brought the mop, the buckets, and the corrosive bleach to the marital home in Cottonwood Heights. Detectives serving the initial warrant had noted the distinct, pervasive smell of bleach, a scent meant to mask the metallic tang of blood and the smell of fear. Thomas and Rosalie Gledhill were the bleach sweepers, the ones trying to scrub away the final, desperate signs of murder beneath the carpet and on the bed frame. For this, both were charged with multiple felony counts of obstruction of justice. This was a shocking moral failure, proving that the family was willing to risk their own freedom, careers, and reputations, and potentially decades in prison, to ensure their daughters. This unprecedented level of parental complicity fundamentally changes the entire narrative. The crime wasn't a secret Jennifer tried to hide alone. It was a collective moral collapse designed to ensure that Matthew Johnson remained a ghost, thereby complicating the prosecution's case. It solidifies Jennifer's character as a manipulator of the highest order, capable of exploiting even the deepest parental bond for her own murderous ends. The parents' actions suggest a blind, unconditional loyalty, but it raises the disturbing possibility of coercion, or perhaps even long-standing, shared secrets that Jennifer could leverage. The family's involvement casts an essential, chilling new light on the $13,000 question we first introduced. With Thomas and Rosalie now exposed as active conspirators in the physical cover-up, the text message, "I need $13K by Friday," is no longer a random plea for financial assistance. It is a terrifyingly clear financial request tied directly to the commission of the crime. Was the money intended to secure their active participation? Was it used to purchase materials, fund the transport, or perhaps secure a remote location for the shallow grave? The depth of their conspiracy confirms that Jennifer's text was not an impulsive cry for help, but a calculated financial transaction supporting a premeditated act. This elevates the Gledhill conspiracy from a spontaneous reaction to a multi-stage, cold-blooded plan. As the legal net tightened around the entire Gledhill unit, Jennifer had nowhere left to turn but inward. Held without bail in the Salt Lake County Jail, facing the irrefutable audio evidence provided by her lover, the physical evidence from her home, and the new charges against her parents, her defense team began its initial maneuvers, a desperate battle against the overwhelming evidence. It was during this period of questioning, when cornered by the gravity of her crimes, that a chilling psychological portrait emerged, a self-perception far more disturbing than the act of murder itself. In a horrifying display of grandiosity and detachment, Jennifer chillingly compared herself to a monarch of malice, the Queen of Hearts from Alice in Wonderland. Famously known for the phrase, "off with their heads," she didn't just confess to murder, she laid claim to a twisted form of moral authority. She mused that she wouldn't mind being put to death if she truly deserved it, but then in the same breath, spoke of eliminating the scum of the earth, firmly believing that she personally could shipshape the entire country into a better place by eliminating bad people. This bizarre, self-aggrandizing belief system suggests that Jennifer Gledhill did not view Matthew's murder as a personal failure or a crime of passion, but rather as an execution of justice, a necessary act of cleansing to clear the path for her desired reality. This is the definitive pivot in our story. It moves us entirely from the forensic evidence of how Matthew died and who helped clean up, to the pure, unadulterated motive of why Jennifer believes she had the right to kill. The trial, scheduled for the following December, would not just be a legal battle over bloodstains and audio tapes. It would be a psychological war over a toxic ego and a self-proclaimed queen's delusion. The missing body became merely a tool for her twisted sense of power. The Gledhill family conspiracy, the bleach, the mop, the hiding of the gun, proved the collaboration behind Matthew Johnson's disappearance. But the most chilling revelations were not about the mechanics of the cover-up, but the twisted psychological landscape of the killer herself. As Jennifer Gledhill sat in the Salt Lake County Jail, denied bail, and facing the combined weight of her lover's testimony and her parents' incarceration, her defense team was forced to confront the impossible task of explaining her actions. It was during this period of legal maneuvering that her bizarre, self-aggrandizing beliefs came to light, painting a portrait of a woman who felt not guilt but entitlement. During questioning, Jennifer didn't express remorse for killing her husband. She expressed a startling sense of moral superiority. She chillingly compared herself to the Queen of Hearts from Alice in Wonderland, a character infamous for ordering executions with a simple, "off with their heads" command. This wasn't a casual remark. It was a profound insight into her delusion. Jennifer was projecting herself as an ultimate authority, a judge and executioner of her own private court. She mused that if society could only round up the scum of this earth and put them on an island or just kill them all, she personally could shipshape this country into a good place. This is the definitive psychological pivot of the entire case. The motivation for killing Matthew was no longer just about ending a bad marriage or securing a future with her lover. It was about removing an obstacle that, in her warped worldview, represented the scum or the bad people she was destined to eliminate. Matthew's discovery of her affair and his subsequent rage stripped Jennifer of her control and exposed her infidelity, making him, in her eyes, a disruptive force that needed to be neutralized for the greater good, her own good. Her decision to kill him in his sleep, and the lack of visible conflict during the execution, suggests this was not a loss of control but a final, clinical judgment. Criminal profilers often look for this level of grandiose detachment, the belief that one's actions are justified by a higher personal morality. For Jennifer, Matthew's life had become expendable because it interfered with her self-created destiny. The comparison to the Queen of Hearts was not a defense mechanism. It was the core truth of her toxic ego. She believed she deserved freedom, happiness, and her lover, and anyone who blocked that path, be it her husband or even the law, was an enemy to be disposed of. The legal defense, however, could not rely on such a bizarre justification. They had to fight the overwhelming evidence, the blood, the gun, the confession, and the family conspiracy. Jennifer's legal strategy became one of attrition, focusing on the single missing element, Matthew's body. The defense team understood that in a classic murder trial, the absence of the victim creates doubt. While the prosecution had overwhelming circumstantial evidence and the killer's own confession, the defense was poised to argue, can you convict someone of murder if the body is never found? This forced the state to repeatedly launch agonizing searches for Matthew, expending vast resources and keeping the entire Utah community in suspense. Teams of National Guard members, Matthew's own comrades, along with dozens of officers and volunteers, continued to scour remote areas near the Idaho border, acting on Jennifer's vague confession of a shallow grave north of their home. Every failed search was a subtle victory for Jennifer's defense. It allowed them to momentarily shift the focus from her grotesque actions to the prosecution's inability to complete the physical case. The missing body became Jennifer's final silent tool of control, a chilling symbol of her unwavering power to dictate the narrative, even from a jail cell. She could give life or death to the evidence simply by withholding one location. The impending trial, set for December, promised to be a dramatic clash between the raw, audio-recorded evidence of a cold-blooded confession and the psychological warfare waged by a killer convinced of her own moral superiority. The psychological portrait of Jennifer Gledhill as a self-proclaimed Queen of Hearts might have explained why she killed, but in the cold reality of the courtroom, only evidence mattered. As the calendar turned towards the pivotal December trial date, the first and most critical battle was waged over her continued freedom, the bail hearing. Jennifer's defense argued vehemently for her release, attempting to reframe her image as a distraught mother of three with deep community ties and no prior history of violence. The narrative they presented was one of emotional turmoil, not calculated malice, but the prosecution, led by the unflinching Salt Lake County Deputy District Attorney Emily Paulos, was relentless in their opposition. Paulos countered the defense's emotional plea with the chilling, undeniable reality of the crime. She meticulously detailed the execution of a sleeping man, the meticulous, cold-blooded disposal of the body into a rooftop storage container, and the subsequent systemic efforts to cover up the crime, involving the calculated complicity of her parents. Paulos argued emphatically that Gledhill posed an imminent flight risk. A woman who had successfully vanished a human body was capable of vanishing herself, and a documented danger to the community, not least because her documented disregard for human life and the rule of law was evident in her own self-comparison to a murderous monarch. The court ultimately concurred with the prosecution's assessment, denying Jennifer bail and ensuring she would remain behind bars until the final verdict. This denial served as the first major legal victory for the prosecution, decisively reinforcing the gravity of the charges and confirming the court's perception of Jennifer as a premeditated threat. With bail decisively denied, the legal maneuvering shifted to destroying the foundational core of the defense's strategy, the classic but precarious no body, no crime argument. While the continuous searches for Matthew Johnson's remains proved devastatingly fruitless, creating small, subtle psychological victories for the defense with every failed expedition, the prosecution was preparing its devastating counterpunch. The defense was banking everything on the premise that without a physical body, the circumstantial evidence, however damning, would be insufficient to overcome the threshold of reasonable doubt. They hoped to exploit the jury's natural tendency to question a case lacking the primary forensic evidence, but the prosecution knew they held the single most potent physical evidence that transcended the need for a corpse. Jennifer Gledhill's own words. The state filed a comprehensive motion seeking the judge's approval to introduce the entirety of the audio recordings and text messages provided by the secret betrayed lover. This motion was the ultimate legal weapon. The prosecution understood the profound difference between reading a cold transcript and hearing the actual voice of the killer. They were determined that the jury should not merely review the sterile text. They needed to hear the full, unedited confession in her own voice. The motion compellingly argued that hearing the tone, the chilling cadence, the clinical detail, and the profound lack of remorse, as she described hoisting Matthew's body into the roof container and burying him, was essential evidence of premeditation and specific intent. This audio testimony, the killer's own voice narrating the crime, would effectively bypass the necessity of a physical body, transforming the circumstantial evidence into direct, visceral, and overwhelming proof of murder, the defense fought the motion fiercely, launching a barrage of counter-arguments that the audio was inherently prejudicial, overly emotional, and potentially unreliable given the context of the recordings by the lover. Their aim was clear: to suppress the most damaging, irrefutable testimony against their client. This legal skirmish over the audio evidence represented the most critical pretrial tension, as the judge's eventual ruling would dramatically dictate the entire tone and trajectory of the December trial. If the full audio was admitted, Jennifer would be forced to listen to her own recorded betrayal in front of the jury, making any defense strategy, short of claiming temporary insanity, virtually impossible. The jury would become the ultimate recipient of her chilling confession. Meanwhile, the parallel investigation into the $13,000 text message continued to yield disturbing results, cementing the financial motive. While the precise destination of the funds remained publicly unclear, the unwavering complicity of Thomas and Rosalie Gledhill, who were themselves awaiting trial for their roles in the obstruction, linked the financial request firmly to the crime's planning phase. This detail extinguished the notion that this was the desperate, unplanned act of a woman in emotional crisis. Instead, it solidified the narrative of a calculated maneuver by a sophisticated criminal mind seeking essential financial and logistical support for a meticulously planned execution. The story had moved far past the initial fleeting secret affair. It had metastasized into a sprawling tale of cold elimination, financial conspiracy, and systemic family betrayal that shocked the quiet community. As the final pretrial motions concluded and the 8-day December trial date was firmly established, the legal stage was set. The case of the state of Utah versus Jennifer Gledhill would ultimately hinge on the credibility of a terrified, betrayed lover, the unconditional, misguided loyalty of a compromised family, and the cold, unfeeling voice of the self-proclaimed Queen of Hearts herself, preserved forever on the damning digital audio files. With the judge's ruling looming over the admissibility of the devastating audio confession, the defense team, led by Jennifer Gledhill's attorneys, had to pivot from denial to desperation. Their last best hope lay in exploiting the single gaping hole in the prosecution's case: the absence of Matthew Johnson's body. This was the famous or infamous no body, no crime defense, a strategy that relies on sowing seeds of doubt by challenging the state to prove that a death even occurred, rather than simply proving who caused it. The premise was legally sound if psychologically precarious. Historically, in cases where a body is missing, prosecutors face an arduous battle to establish the corpus delicti, the fundamental facts proving that a crime, in this case a murder, has actually taken place. The defense's primary argument was that without a corpse, there is no forensic evidence of a killing blow, no documented cause of death, and no definitive proof that Matthew Johnson wasn't merely a missing person who abandoned his family and military obligations to escape his troubled marriage. They would argue that Jennifer Gledhill's confession, while damning, was the product of a disturbed mind under severe emotional duress, a plea for help, not a factual account of a murder, but the defense's application of the no body, no crime defense faced a massive modern obstacle: Jennifer's own words. Utah law, like that of many states, allows a murder conviction without a body if the defendant's confession is corroborated by substantial, independent evidence. And the prosecution had that in spades. The defense planned to systematically attack every piece of that corroborating evidence. First, the blood. While the state claimed the blood under the bed was Matthew's, the defense would challenge the DNA sample integrity and its quantity, arguing it was merely residual domestic evidence, insufficient to prove a fatal event. Second, the gun. They would argue that the Glock found hidden in the child's onesie at the parents' home only proved a weapon was present, not that it was the murder weapon or that Jennifer fired it. Third, the family. The defense would portray Thomas and Rosalie Gledhill as confused, elderly parents trying to help their distraught daughter clean up a simple mess after a volatile domestic dispute, not co-conspirators in a murder cover-up, but the true battle was the audio. The defense's most desperate argument against the audio confession was that it was obtained illegally or under circumstances that rendered it unreliable. They would argue the lover, whose name remains concealed in many reports, was acting as a state agent when he secretly recorded Jennifer, violating her rights. They would further claim that the tape's narrative was influenced by the lover himself, who, by his own admission, was terrified and attempting to distance himself from a psychotic partner. This strategy was a calculated risk. If the judge allowed the tapes, the defense would be forced to call Jennifer to the stand to testify, risking her being cross-examined on her own recorded, devastating admission. The defense also had to contend with the growing media narrative, the public perception of Jennifer as the Queen of Hearts. They attempted to combat this by portraying Matthew Johnson as an unstable, aggressive spouse who had a protective order filed against him by Jennifer shortly before the events, even though the court had ultimately denied a permanent order. The aim was to introduce reasonable doubt by shifting focus to the volatility of the victim, suggesting Jennifer had acted out of fear or self-defense, though the execution of a sleeping man made that argument nearly impossible to sustain. Meanwhile, the prosecution's lead investigator, Detective Scott Williams, continued the agonizing hunt for the body. Despite the digital evidence and confession, the lack of Matthew's body provided an enduring psychological advantage to Jennifer and a continuous source of pain for Matthew's military family. Detective Williams organized specialized search teams, utilizing everything from ground-penetrating radar to National Guard assets to meticulously comb the vast, rugged terrain north of Salt Lake City, near the Wyoming border. Each failed search made the no body, no crime argument resonate louder with the public. However, the prosecution remained unshaken. They intended to present Matthew's life, his distinguished military service, his scheduled return to work, his sudden, non-communicative disappearance, as overwhelming evidence that he had not chosen to walk away but had been brutally silenced. The case, they argued, was built not on speculation but on the killer's self-incriminating roadmap of the crime, confirmed by the blood on the floor and the gun hidden away like a trophy. The prosecution was confident they had the words, the weapon, and the motive. The absence of the body was merely a tactical nuisance, not a legal defense. The stage was set for a dramatic collision between modern forensic technology, the damning nature of digital evidence, and the desperate, centuries-old legal defense of the absent victim. The case of Jennifer Gledhill would become a landmark trial, testing the limits of how far a defendant can run when their own voice has betrayed them. The legal maneuvering over the no body, no crime defense played out in the sterile confines of the courtroom, but outside, the cost of Jennifer Gledhill's arrogance was measured in human anguish and exhaustion. Matthew Johnson was not just a name on a charge sheet. He was a highly respected soldier, a member of the Utah National Guard whose sudden, complete disappearance left a devastating void. As Detective Scott Williams pressed on with the relentless search, the hunt for Matthew's missing body became an agonizing, communal effort that dragged his colleagues and family into the killer's cold narrative. Matthew's military unit and fellow servicemen, who understood duty and accountability, found themselves engaged in a mission unlike any other, searching vast, desolate terrain for the remains of one of their own, knowing the man responsible was his wife. They used their highly specialized training, equipment, and discipline to comb through areas north of Salt Lake City, near the Wyoming border, the general region where Jennifer confessed she had buried him. The sheer futility of these operations was heartbreaking. Every failed sweep, every dry patch of dirt, was a subtle confirmation of Jennifer's power. She held the final secret, the location of his resting place, and she used that knowledge to inflict continuous emotional torture on the very people who deserved closure. The search was a public testament to the victim's life, transforming Matthew's former colleagues from soldiers into reluctant, desperate mourners searching for an end to their grief. For Matthew's extended family, the pain was twofold: the loss of a loved one and the public humiliation of the crime's motive, the secret affair and the calculated nature of the murder. They watched helplessly as Jennifer's defense tried to posthumously paint Matthew as an aggressor, attempting to justify her actions by citing the domestic protective order filed months earlier. To them, Matthew was not an abuser. He was a man betrayed, executed in his sleep by the woman who promised to cherish him. The lack of a body denied them the fundamental ritual of burial, turning their grief into an open, perpetual wound. This personal tragedy, now a national headline, exposed the deep, painful divide between the person Matthew was to his country and the disposable obstacle he became to his wife. Meanwhile, The legal focus shifted back to the family's complicity. Jennifer's parents, Thomas and Rosalie Gledhill, were facing severe felony charges for obstruction of justice. The prosecution had an airtight case. They had intervened directly in the aftermath of a murder, helping their daughter clean a scene where a man had been killed. Their actions were far from the simple cleanup after a domestic dispute the defense attempted to portray. They had knowingly aided in the destruction of evidence that placed them squarely on the wrong side of the law. The charges against Thomas and Rosalie raised profound questions about the limits of familial loyalty. Did they know Matthew was dead when they helped? Or did they believe they were merely assisting their distraught daughter in a dire situation? Regardless of their knowledge, their actions, cleaning with bleach, assisting in the disposal process, and hiding the murder weapon, the Glock found wrapped in a child's onesie, demonstrated a complete disregard for the investigation and the pursuit of justice for Matthew. Their trial, set separately, loomed as a devastating mirror of Jennifer's own moral collapse, revealing that the infection of cold calculation had spread through the family unit. The prosecution's theory was that their assistance wasn't random. It was motivated perhaps by the urgent demand for the $13,000, suggesting a financial conspiracy underlying the domestic homicide. The Gledhill case was no longer just about a woman killing her husband. It was about the erosion of institutional trust, a soldier betrayed by his spouse, a legal system challenged by the absence of a body, and a family unit corrupted by the instinct for self-preservation over moral duty. The emotional fallout was immense. 3 young children were left without a father and with a mother who was revealed to be a cold-blooded killer, all while their grandparents faced prison time for helping her cover up the atrocity. The only solace for Matthew's loved ones was the relentless effort of Detective Williams and the promise that Jennifer's own voice would ultimately bring justice. The pretrial skirmishes, the denied bail, the indictment of her parents, and the unsuccessful attempts to suppress the most damaging evidence had all served as mere prelude to the main event. In December, the long-awaited trial of the state of Utah versus Jennifer Gledhill began. The atmosphere in the Salt Lake City courtroom was electric, fueled by months of intense media coverage that had already cemented Jennifer's image as the cold, calculating Queen of Hearts. The prosecution, led by Emily Paulos, opened their case with a clean, devastating narrative. They didn't dwell on the absence of Matthew Johnson's body. Instead, they immediately presented Matthew's life, his exemplary military service, his scheduled life, and his sudden, utter silence, to establish that he had been eliminated, not merely abandoned his family. The opening argument was a masterclass in establishing corpus delicti, without forensic confirmation, using Jennifer's own trail of evidence as the primary exhibit. They presented the bloody carpet, the hidden gun, and the panicked cleanup as silent witnesses to the crime. The defense, adhering to their precarious strategy, focused their opening on painting Matthew as a volatile figure, and Jennifer as an emotionally shattered victim, reacting to an abusive situation. They argued that the physical evidence was circumstantial, the blood insufficient, and the whole case was built on the dubious, self-serving testimony of the secret lover, a man who had everything to gain by turning on Jennifer to avoid obstruction charges himself. The defense's goal was to subtly shift the jury's focus away from the missing man and onto the messy dynamics of a failed marriage. But the defining, watershed moment of the entire trial arrived when the prosecution called the confidential informant, the lover, to the stand. His testimony was the linchpin of the state's case. Pale and visibly nervous, the lover recounted the confession, the initial, shocking text message, and the detailed phone calls where Jennifer, in a clinical and chilling manner, described the execution of Matthew as he slept. The defense attempted to discredit him, attacking his moral character, questioning his relationship with Jennifer, and suggesting police pressure had coerced his testimony. Yet his voice remained steady, his account corroborated by the hard data of their recorded interactions. Then came the moment everyone, including the defendant herself, was dreading: the audio weapon. The prosecution played the recordings. The courtroom fell into absolute silence. The jurors, the press, and the gallery listened in rapt horror as Jennifer Gledhill's own voice filled the chamber. It wasn't the sound of a weeping, remorseful woman. It was the chilling, matter-of-fact tone of someone describing a chore. She spoke of the logistics, Loading Matthew's body, the difficulty of moving his dead weight, the exact location of the makeshift grave. Her voice, preserved in the digital files, was the most powerful evidence the prosecution could possibly present. It was an instant, undeniable confirmation of her mental state, establishing the premeditation that was essential for a first-degree murder conviction. The visual drama was focused entirely on Jennifer Gledhill. As her own recorded words, her betrayal, her detachment, her cold accounting of the murder, echoed through the courtroom, she sat stone-faced, staring blankly ahead. Her composure, often cited by the defense as proof of her calmness, now read as chilling indifference. The silence that followed the recording was deafening. The jury had heard the truth not from a detective or a witness, but from the killer herself. The no body, no crime defense had just been eviscerated by the one piece of evidence Jennifer could not dispose of, her own voice. The impact of the audio was immediate and profound. It undermined every single argument the defense had carefully constructed. The claim that the confession was coerced or unreliable was extinguished by the steady, narrative tone of her voice. The argument that Matthew might be alive was destroyed by the detailed, eyewitness account of his burial, delivered by the person who performed it. The state had successfully used digital evidence to turn an absent victim case into an open and shut confession case. The court adjourned for the day with the weight of the audio hanging heavy over the defense table. The battlefield had been irrevocably tilted. The echoes of Jennifer Gledhill's chilling confession still resonated in the courtroom. The audio recording had stripped away the defense's entire edifice of reasonable doubt, exposing the no body, no crime strategy as a desperate, hollow maneuver. With the jury's attention now fixated on the defendant, the defense was forced into its most precarious position, the last stand. Their final, desperate hope was to counter the cold detachment of the recording with a human narrative, a narrative of fear, panic, and financial ruin. The defense attorney focused heavily on the 13,000 text message that Jennifer sent to her father just days before the murder. Where the prosecution saw premeditation, the defense attempted to paint a picture of financial desperation. They argued that Jennifer was not seeking funds to execute a murder plot, but was frantically trying to secure money to pay for legal fees, childcare, or even to pay Matthew a large sum to convince him to agree to a divorce settlement without an ugly custody battle. The defense suggested that the escalating demands of the divorce and the confrontation over the affair had pushed Jennifer to the brink, leading to an unplanned, impulsive reaction to a perceived threat from Matthew, rather than a calculated first-degree murder. This was their final, frantic attempt to reduce the charge from premeditated murder to a lesser charge of manslaughter or second-degree murder, implying a lack of malicious intent. However, the prosecution masterfully dismantled this narrative. Prosecutor Emily Paulos brought back the confidential informant, the lover, to testify again, revealing further details of the relationship and Jennifer's mental state leading up to the murder. They established that Jennifer had felt increasingly entitled and empowered in her new relationship, viewing Matthew solely as an obstacle. The prosecution argued that the $13,000 was not a cry for help, but the funding for her getaway, the necessary cash to stabilize her life after eliminating the inconvenient husband. They used the contrast between the cold logistics on the audio tape and the purported financial panic to showcase Jennifer's calculating nature, a woman who plans meticulously but struggles to maintain the cover story. The biggest gamble of the defense was the possibility of calling Jennifer Gledhill to the stand. This was a high-stakes decision. If she testified, she could potentially explain away the chilling detachment heard on the audio, perhaps by claiming fear or delusion. But the risk was astronomical. The prosecution would tear apart her testimony, using the very audio confession as a roadmap, forcing her to confront her own words directly and potentially cracking her calculated composure under cross-examination. Ultimately, the defense decided the risk was too great. Jennifer Gledhill remained silent, sealing her fate by allowing the prosecution's interpretation of her voice to be the only one the jury heard. The final phase of the trial, the closing arguments, became a stark battle over narrative. The defense delivered an emotionally charged plea, urging the jury to remember the principle of reasonable doubt. They emphasized the absence of the body, the missing cause of death, and the tainted nature of the informant's testimony. They repeated the mantra, "The state has presented a story, but they have not presented proof beyond a reasonable doubt that Matthew Johnson is dead, only that he is missing." But the prosecution's closing was devastatingly simple. Emily Paulos held up a transcript of the audio recording. She didn't read it. She simply stated, "The defense wants you to believe this woman who detailed her husband's shooting, his loading into a roof container, and his burial in a shallow grave, is lying to a lover. They want you to believe that Matthew Johnson, a dedicated soldier, is simply missing despite the blood under his own bed and the gun hidden by his own wife. But you have the proof. You heard the proof. You don't need a body when the killer gave you the entire crime, minute by chilling minute." The case was sent to the jury. The fate of Jennifer Gledhill, the self-proclaimed Queen of Hearts, rested in the hands of 12 citizens tasked with determining whether a meticulous confession, supported by digital and circumstantial evidence, was enough to overcome the fundamental principle of the missing victim. The waiting began, pregnant with the tension of justice deferred. The waiting was the ultimate torture. The tension that had defined the courtroom for weeks now compressed into the tense silence of the jury room. 12 citizens held the fate of Jennifer Gledhill and the closure for Matthew Johnson's family in their hands. The prosecution's case was unprecedented, a clear, concise confession supported by digital and circumstantial evidence, but challenged by the absence of a body. Could a jury convict someone of murder without a corpse? The deliberation lasted for days, a clear sign of the deep moral and legal wrestling occurring behind closed doors. The jury had to weigh the principle of reasonable doubt against the devastating weight of Jennifer's own recorded voice. They had to reconcile the fact that a dedicated soldier was demonstrably missing with the defense's final, desperate plea that, without a medical cause of death, he could still simply be gone. Every minute felt like an hour to Matthew's loved ones, who were physically present, waiting for the word that would finally acknowledge their trauma. When the jury finally returned, the courtroom achieved a silence so absolute it felt unnatural. Jennifer Gledhill stood emotionless, a picture of cold composure, having learned to master her reactions throughout the months of legal scrutiny. The courtroom clerk read the verdict, and the moment was irreversible. Guilty Jennifer Gledhill was convicted of first-degree murder. She was also convicted on all counts of obstruction of justice, desecration of a human body, and witness tampering. The verdict was a powerful judicial statement. In the modern age, a body is not required to prove murder when the digital evidence, the killer's own voice and text messages, paints an unassailable picture of the crime. For Matthew Johnson's family, the verdict was not a celebration, but a profound, heavy confirmation of the worst fears they had harbored for months. Justice had been served, but closure remained elusive. The sentencing phase followed, marking the final public chapter of the case. Jennifer Gledhill received a sentence that acknowledged the cold cruelty of her actions. She was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison for the murder of Matthew Johnson. Her parents, Thomas and Rosalie Gledhill, who had enabled the cover-up, also received felony convictions for obstruction, facing years of probation and fines, a crushing, humiliating end to their quiet lives. The conviction delivered a clear message to the public. Complicity, regardless of familial loyalty, would be met with severe legal consequences. The conviction brought accountability, but it could not restore Matthew Johnson's presence, nor could it end the agonizing silence surrounding his grave. Jennifer Gledhill, the only person who knows the location, has never wavered. Even after conviction, she remained silent, holding on to the secret as her final perverse act of control. This is the enduring legacy of the Queen of Hearts, the denial of dignity. Matthew Johnson, a man who swore an oath to his country, who faced danger abroad, now lies nameless and alone, denied a proper resting place, denied the military honors he deserved, and denied the quiet closure his children and family desperately need. Jennifer Gledhill's silence transforms her prison sentence into a continued sentence for her victims, a sentence of perpetual, searching grief. The case set an important precedent in Utah law regarding murder convictions without a corpse. But the human cost overshadows the legal victory. The 3 Gledhill children must now grow up knowing their mother executed their father and forced their grandparents into a criminal conspiracy. The Queen of Hearts did not just eliminate her husband. She destroyed her entire family ecosystem, all for the fleeting promise of freedom and a $13,000 Clean slate. The tragedy of Matthew Johnson is a reminder that the most dangerous battle a soldier can face is not on a foreign battlefield but in the quiet, treacherous betrayal within his own home. And sometimes the truth of a crime is found not in a body, but in the heartless confession of the killer's own voice. The legal battle is over, but the moral struggle continues. Jennifer Gledhill is incarcerated, yet she maintains the final power by withholding the location of Matthew Johnson's body. Do you believe that legislation should be passed to mandate that convicted murderers disclose the location of their victims' remains? Or should this information remain privileged even after a guilty verdict? What do you think is the ultimate form of justice for Matthew Johnson? And should Jennifer Gledhill ever be granted parole if she continues her silence? Share your powerful thoughts in the comments below.